Story 1. One time my granddad bought a sausage roll at a football match during halftime. When he returned to his seat, it was overdone. The pastry was quite burned. He was irate. He did not take it back straight away because the second half was about to start, but he spent much of the second half angrily lamenting his savory snack disappointment. He took the remainder home, called the customer service number on the back, and kept the rest in the freezer for the next couple of weeks. Skip ahead to the next match day. My granddad told me we were heading out early so he could have his sausage roll replaced. The customer service line told him to go to kiosk 3 at the front of the ground next to the ticket office. When we arrived, however, the shutters were down at the food place. He looked around, growling and turning red in the face, and stamped right over to window number 3 of the ticket office. He slammed his frozen burned sausage roll down like a flaky gauntlet. I tried to convince him the ticket office was a completely different department from the catering concession, but he would hear none of it. The woman at the ticket window repeatedly attempted in vain to explain the same thing. They sell match tickets, not hot snacks, but this only made him more angry. A colleague appeared behind the glass, so there were 2 people to complain to. Then a head steward came to try to defuse the situation, and my granddad began to wave the burnt sausage roll in his face. I was actually surprised he did not hit him with it. I was mortified by the whole affair, wishing I had stayed at the house until nearer kickoff. Eventually, after an hour or so, the shutters came up on the food concession. A man at the counter said, "You must be Mr. Allergens," and calmly resolved the situation, presenting a freshly baked sausage roll with the steady hands of a surgeon. My granddad was completely satisfied with the result of his hour of insolent rage. As we walked away, he turned to me and said, "That's how you get these things sorted." Story 2. I was 13 when this happened. My mother had made a reservation at a hotel, but when we arrived, the woman at the desk said there was an error and that my mother's payment had not gone through. She offered us a discounted double room. Instead of accepting the room and leaving, my mother began shouting in the middle of the hotel lobby that nobody was going anywhere until she got her room. She continued to pester the clerk, who could not do anything about it, and eventually the clerk called the police for public disturbance. It was mortifying. Story 3. This was not my parent but my grandparent. When I was about 10 years old, my grandmother went out and bought us McDonald's, her, my brother, and me. When we got home, there were no napkins in the bags. No big deal, right? We had paper towels and napkins at home, and my brother and I are careful not to make a mess while we eat. My grandmother drove us back to McDonald's, demanded to see a manager, and screeched about how upset she was that we did not receive any napkins. I wanted to melt into the floor and disappear. It was just napkins, Nanny. Story 4. When I was a young child on a long-distance flight, my mother let my brother and me sleep on the floor. For safety reasons, the flight attendants told my mother we were not allowed to sleep there. She began to argue with the attendants, who then spoke to the pilots. The pilots warned they would turn the plane around unless we got up from the floor, but she continued to argue. The pilots announced they were about to turn the plane around because of my mother, so all the passengers became angry. Eventually, she backed down when the passengers and flight crew on the Boeing 747 were against her. Story 5. Before Value Village, known as Savers in the United States, changed its policy, she would cut price tags to get discounts because cashiers would make up whatever price they thought appropriate on the spot. If they overcharged, she would involve a manager, which I hated. Story 6. I was with my parents on vacation when the hotel accidentally added charges to our bill. My mother marched to the front desk and demanded to see the manager. There was a long line, but she cut in front of everyone. The manager was not very helpful, possibly because my mother was rude. My mother then told the other customers in line that the hotel was a scam and that they were ripping us off with fraudulent charges. She made a scene. The hotel called the police and we were escorted off the premises by police officers. I died inside. Story 7. Ugh, my dad. He can be such a jerk if you get his order wrong, whether it's fast food or a sit-down restaurant. He often yells at waitstaff if they undercook his steak. It has to be well done. Otherwise, he says he loses his appetite. One time when I was younger, we went to Burger King and sat down to eat. He took one bite of his burger, spat it out, and immediately began complaining that it was undercooked. He cut in front of everyone in line to yell at the cashier. When the cook appeared, he launched the burger, hitting the poor kid directly in the face. He is now banned for life from that Burger King. Story 8. My mum demanded to see the cafe's hygiene certificate when she saw an employee go from cutting cake in the kitchen to handling money at the till, even though the real problem was the opposite. Story 9. My mom asked me to call her a taxi using a ride-hailing application. She called me several times to complain that the driver had not taken the route she thought was best. She has never owned a car and does not know how to drive. The driver had followed the route suggested by the navigation system. She got out halfway and took the subway. The driver later called me in tears, shocked and unsure what he had done wrong. Apologizing. I felt awful. I never booked her a taxi again. Story 10. I grew up in a small town on the cusp of a growth boom. We knew our town had finally made it when we got an Olive Garden. We used to eat there 2 to 3 times a month. My mother and I would always split an entree and my father would get his own. We knew the rule. If you are splitting an entree and you have more than one family-style bowl of salad, you will be charged an extra $4 for the additional person. That is fair. 2 entrees come with 2 unlimited salads. One day my father decided he wanted more salad. Only he wanted the additional salad, but the waitress said that if she refilled the bowl, we would be charged the extra $4. Lo and behold, my parents threw the biggest tantrum because only he wanted the additional salad. They demanded to speak to a manager. The manager explained the rule, which we already knew, but offered to waive the extra salad fee just to stop the yelling. When our bill came, the manager had waived my father's entree and the additional salad charge. My mother got up, interrupted the manager while he was talking to other guests, threw the check in his face, and asked, "What is this?" She was furious that he had waived my father's meal. He ate the meal. Therefore, we wanted to pay for it. She would not stop raising her voice until she was allowed to pay for the meal but not the salad. The manager was confused but obliged. When they brought the change, the manager slipped in a few free appetizer coupons. My mother ripped them up and threw them on the ground as she left. I did not eat out with them for a month, and I still refused to go to Olive Garden with them. Story 11. I worked at Best Buy. I stopped in with my mom one day because she wanted to buy me the Star Wars digital video disc box set for my birthday. I had a huge crush on the girl who was working the customer service counter. The digital video disc set rang up $10 more than it was priced, and my mom deliberately did not say anything until after the transaction so she could claim the $5 Michigan Scan Law bounty. My crush did not know how to process it and the manager was busy, so my mom tore into her about how it was her job and how she should know how to do things. She did this at my job in front of the girl I liked. My life was misery for a while afterward. Edit. Rest in peace my inbox. No, I never got up the courage to ask her out, and she left the store afterward. Story 12. Scene. Any fast food drive-thru. Worker. Ma'am, can you please drive forward a little bit while your food finishes up? Mom. No, folds her arms. Story 13. My dad just loved to argue and he loved a deal. We were shopping in a department store when I found a pair of pants I was mildly interested in. The pants were tagged at $40, and the sign on the rack read, "All pants $25. I asked the sales clerk if they had them in my size. The clerk said those aren't supposed to be on that rack. My dad lost his temper and insisted on getting the pants for $25, then started asking for a courtesy discount on top of that. The issue escalated to the floor manager and the store manager. I didn't want the pants. They were okay pants, nothing special, and I didn't care very much about them. I told my dad I didn't want the pants, but by then he didn't care what I wanted. He wanted the pants at the better price. After about an hour of arguing, the store manager said, "We're not giving you the pants at that price. Take them or leave them at $40. So we left them, which suited me fine because I didn't want the pants. Story 14. Not me, but my sister-in-law. Her stepdad and mother took the family to a Red Lobster. They arrived and it was very busy. The stepdad approached the host and said they had a reservation. The host explained that the restaurant does not take reservations. and that there would be a 20-minute wait. He flipped out, screaming that he had called 3 hours beforehand and made a reservation. The host again said that was not possible. He continued to yell and demanded to speak to a manager. The manager came out and told him the same thing. He continued causing a scene, and people began leaving to get away from him. Finally, the manager said, "Fine. We will seat you ahead of everyone else who has been waiting." He thanked her, and they were seated. After the waitress walked away, he slyly winked and said to my brother and the rest of the family, "That is how you get things done. I wasn't going to wait 20 minutes. My brother refused to eat or order for fear that his food had been tampered with. Story 15. A grocery store had a sign that said if an item rang up higher than the advertised price, it was free. It was the 1980s, and stores did stupid things like this that I never see today. My mother was buying a box of Little Debbie cakes, and they rang up at $2.85 instead of the advertised $2.50. She wanted the free cakes. The cashier did not know what to do and summoned a manager. The manager told her to ring up the sale otherwise and that he would be right back. He came back, handed my mother 35 cents cheerfully and said, "There you go." My mother pointed to the sign behind him and he said the last manager had put that up. It did not make any sense, and he was the new manager who had not had the sign removed yet. It was a printed plastic sign screwed into the wall. My mother insisted they honor their sign, and he refused. Up to that point, as an adult looking back, I was entirely on her side. She gathered her things, decided against taking the Little Debbie cakes on principle, and we drove downtown to the main store of the small chain of 3 to 5 stores, knowing the office was next door. We walked into a perfectly 1980s wood-paneled office where my mother asked the secretary to speak to the owner, and was permitted to do so, since this was a family-owned business with an office smaller than the row of cubicles my staff occupy at work. My mother unleashed a tirade about how she had lost faith in his brand, and how his word was meaningless since they would not honor the sign. The owner stood up, profusely apologized, validated her anger, then pulled out his wallet and handed her a $5 bill along with a promise that he would speak to the manager, and that the sign would either be honored or removed. When we got home, the ice cream we had bought had melted in the trunk because of the summer heat and ruined the cereal and the bread. Story 16. I might be late, but my dad once asked the clerk at the Verizon wireless store to give the clerk's own social security number after the clerk asked for my dad's. My dad walked out with a stranger's social security number on a sticky note. I was a silent bystander because I really wanted my first phone. Story 17. My father consistently returns food to grocery stores when he is dissatisfied with the quality. The worst is when he returns the 2-pound bricks of cheddar cheese because they became moldy before they should have. Story 18. My mother-in-law is truly a Karen. Going out to eat with her is always a nightmare. Her orders have 14 special requests, but she is not at all kind about it. She is defensive from the get-go, like you are an idiot who has already screwed the order up. No dressing, not on the side, nothing, completely dry. Do you understand? I will send it back. The one I will never forget was dinner at Joe's Crab Shack. If you've never been, it's one of those places that every so often plays a song that requires the entire staff to drop everything and do a little synchronized dance. It's quick, everyone gets a little kick out of it, and it's part of the fun. My mother-in-law Karen knew this. It was not like she had never been there, but apparently she was not willing to wait 2 extra minutes for her dry salad, so she started going off as soon as the dancing started. She got a manager who clearly knows Karen well, and he offered a quick apology, a discount, and her dry salad. But Karen was not completely satisfied. She told us that even though dinner for our party of 8 was on her, she was not tipping the waitress a single penny. She complained loudly for the rest of the meal and antagonized our waitress over petty things. I worked many years in customer service and, I'm a decent human being. I made sure to get my bill separate so I could tip for the entire table. I wrote a quick note on the receipt, something like, "Way to stay positive, even when the customer's a jerk." I was a little afraid of the wrath of Karen. It was one of my first interactions with her too, but when the waitress came and hugged me, Karen and I locked eyes. She knew. I didn't care. Don't be a cunt, Karen. Story 19. My mother is a nightmare with customer service, even though her daughter, work in customer service and deal with people like her daily. Many incidents stick out, but one that embarrassed me was when we were at Walmart. A stalker was struggling and dropped her price scanner on the floor. I was going to help gather her things when my mother suddenly yelled, "You should pick that up. People could trip," and then pushed the cart away. I was so embarrassed I walked away. When I told my mother the girl had dropped it by accident, my mother replied, "Well, she should be more careful." Story 20. About once a month my dad gets drunk and calls various customer service centers making demands. Once he finally gets off the phone, frequently 45 minutes or more, he spends the next few days telling us about how he slew the customer service dragon and how people do not appreciate their customers nowadays. No duh, Dad, you are being an asshole. No one appreciates that. If you have worked for DirecTV, satellite television provider, customer service at any time since 1996, I apologize on behalf of my dad. Another story. I remembered one time McDonald's was running a 2-for-1 breakfast sandwich deal where the total was about $3. He got his breakfast, drove about 25 minutes to work, realized he was missing one of the sandwiches, and proceeded to call McDonald's customer support every evening after work for a week to complain about his wasted $1.50. They apologized and gave him coupons, but he just wanted to yell. Story 21. Not exactly the question, but my dad was great with customers. We had a small family business selling and installing fireplaces. On more than one occasion, when a customer called or came in after the installers had left to complain about one of the men being rude, he would put on a look of grave concern. He would then tell a backstory, saying things like, "Oh no, not again," take a dramatic inhale and make a tsk-tisk noise, then go on about how he had told the employee it was his last warning and that he would have to let him go. The blood draining from people's faces or the dead silence on the other end of the phone was magical, followed by the customer frantically explaining that maybe it was not that bad or blaming themselves. He was never going to fire anyone, but he would quickly find out who was just complaining for fun. Many customers have no qualms about getting an employee in trouble, but in general people do not want to jeopardize someone's livelihood. Story 22. When I was 6, my mom took my brothers and me out to Golden Corral for dinner. She went to the buffet, got a steak, and came back to the table. She is an avid fan of A1 steak sauce and cannot eat steak without it. She poured the A1 onto her plate, tasted it, and was instantly horrified. She then poured the Golden Corral steak sauce next to the A1, and they matched perfectly. Outraged, she called a waitress and then the manager to show them her experiment and how she had exposed the great steak sauce fraud of 2006. My brothers and I were scarred for life. I still have nightmares about it. Story 23. My mom and I went shopping, and she dropped a melon on the way out. She then claimed it was bruised and demanded a full refund. When the employee refused, my mom shouted at customer service and demanded to see the manager. I just sat there with an exasperated expression on my face. Afterwards, a customer service employee gave me a chocolate bar, so 7-year-old me was happy. Story 24. My mother did this nonstop in restaurants while I was growing up. She would demand to see the manager because my burger, which I had asked to be cooked medium, had some pink in it. Story 25. Not about the child, but I think this fits. I had an extremely annoying neighbor who, because I am a giant sucker, I was kind to. She asked me to come with her to dinner because it was her birthday, and I knew I was the only person who would go with her, so how could I say no? We went and brought our kids, all girls, 1 mine and 2 hers. She made her oldest do her math homework right at the table. When the child asked her for help, and this was like 3rd grade math, the mother said it was too hard. I ended up helping. The waiter was fine. He came by and took our orders. She was already acting strange, but she always acted that way, so I did not think much of it. The waiter came by again and asked if we needed anything. She dismissed him, waved him off, and told him no. Then about 30 seconds later, she turned to me and said, "Can you believe how awful the waiter is? He will not even refill my drink," and went on about all these issues that did not exist. I said, "He just asked if you needed anything." She cut me off and said, "I am going to talk to the manager." She spoke to the manager as if this were the worst experience in the history of her miserable existence. I was in shock. Her kids had their heads down. Mine was oblivious, and I laughed. The manager gave her half off the meal. Then she said, "That is my half, so you only need to pay the rest." "Oh gee, thanks." I left a large tip and a note on my receipt saying the waiter was great and apologizing for the complaints that were not warranted. It was the second most embarrassing restaurant experience of my life. Story 26. Once I was in a record store with my dad. He bought a record that cost 19.99 euros. He paid with a 20 euro bill. The clerk took the money, put it in the register, and gave my dad the compact disc in a plastic bag. I started walking away when I noticed my dad was not moving. As I turned around, I heard him tell the clerk that they still had to give him his 1 cent back. The clerk replied that they do not return 1 or 2 cent coins because they do not accept them and therefore do not have them in the store. My dad replied that this was judicially impossible and asked for the manager. In the end, one of the clerks gave my dad a cent from his own wallet. Story 27. I don't like going to restaurants with her. She thinks that because she worked as a waitress for a year 35 years ago, it gives her the right to act like a complete asshole toward servers. She also thinks not tipping will encourage them to get their act together. Joke's on you, Mom. I always find our server after we're seated, give them $20, and apologize in advance for your poor behavior. She knows what I think and does not care. She believes she is sticking to her principles and that tipping poor service will encourage their laziness. She claims she has never had good service and that something will always be wrong. It's not going to stop. If you wait on her, I am very sorry. She waited tables at Pizza Hut when she was 20. She looks back through rose-colored glasses and says, "I worked hard and went above and beyond to get my tips," then yells at a waitress for trying to refill her drink. "Excuse me? Did I ask for a refill?" Obviously, logic and empathy are not her strong points. Story 28. My grandmother was not only a "let me talk to your manager" type. She was a racist, and advancing dementia completely turned off her filter. I have blocked out all the context except that I took her to buy yarn and something went wrong. I think maybe they shorted her a couple of dollars or would not honor a coupon. Whatever, it was ended in a "let me talk to your manager" moment followed by a tirade to the manager about how they should not be hiring Mexicans. I remember having to talk over her and say, "Oh my God, you cannot talk to her like that. Nothing you just said is okay." Then trying to push her wheelchair out of the store as fast as possible while she dug her feet into the ground to make me stop, so she could go back to trying to ruin someone's day. I wondered whether I would go to jail for elder abuse. If her ankles snapped in the process, because nothing was going to stop me from getting her out of that store. I got her into the car, then went back in and apologized until I was blue in the face. I wish I could say it was an isolated incident, but it definitely was not. If by any chance any sales clerks or phone representatives who had to deal with my grandmother read this, I am incredibly sorry. I apologize on behalf of my whole family, and I would give you a hug if I could. As an interesting side effect of caring for her, I have a tendency to wander off and pretend to look at things when we get to the register if I am with someone who is paying. I think she gave me a genuine phobia. Edit. Thanks for the helpful suggestions about pulling the wheelchair backward next time. She passed away 2 years ago, so it is thankfully something I will not have to deal with for a while. I had never experienced someone digging their heels in before, and I was panicking trying to get her out of the store before she tried anything else. I think under better circumstances I would have worked it out. Bonus story. This one happened at home and is equal parts amusing and awful in hindsight. It was some kind of special occasion, probably one of our birthdays, because we were all sitting at the kitchen table eating cake. The nightly routine was that we would sit down to eat dinner and she would put the television on to the evening news, which we would half listen to. They were talking about something political and said, "And the House Judicial Committee approved this." My grandmother caught that one line and said, "The Judicial Committee? Those damn Jews. What are they doing with all these committees?" I was caught between wanting to laugh at her misunderstanding and making a noise of horror, and instead I inhaled sharply and aspirated a large mouthful of chocolate cake. I coughed so hard and so long that my mother had to take me to urgent care because it set off my asthma. Good times, everyone. Story 29. I was at a cell phone store a few years ago. when phones were first becoming water resistant. A kid had gone swimming with his phone all day. The phone showed discoloration on the screen and the touchscreen was not working. The kid clearly knew he had messed up and kept asking his mother to let them leave, saying the phone still worked and he would survive. The mother did not try to be civil. She came in and immediately behaved like an abusive customer. I remember she laughed and said, "Oh, you are going to hate me. You should just get your manager now." Story 30. I was young, and my mom and stepdad took us to McDonald's. Somehow a nail got stuck in the tire, causing a flat. I'm not sure if it happened in the parking lot, but they were convinced it did. They spoke to the manager. I don't remember exactly what they demanded, but they did not get it. They went into the street, waving people away and saying the restaurant was closed because they were angry. It seemed ridiculously excessive. Story 31. My mom used to run restaurants. My stepfather was a chef in high-end restaurants and expects to be treated better than he is, whatever the circumstances. They are not fun to go out to eat with. The most embarrassing experience for them was one in which I embarrassed them. My wife and I pride ourselves on being a relief table when we go out to eat. Both of us have been servers, and we are the counterpoint to a difficult table. Barring horrible service or bad food, we are easy customers. Tip well and try to have a good time with our server. We just treat people nicely, so you can imagine our disdain when my parents act like royalty at a dinner service. My wife and I went out to dinner with them. They were being particularly difficult. My mom acted like she was Gordon Ramsay, critiquing everything down to the amount of bubbles in her seltzer. She said it looked like it was time to change the carbon dioxide. My stepfather became increasingly irritated over small things, like the amount of ice in his drink and how the waitress did not top off his water fast enough. It came to a head when my stepfather ordered a steak medium well. It came back medium well, but he suddenly said he wanted it medium rare while it was cooking and blamed the kitchen for not reading his mind. He and my mom started demanding complimentary items. I interrupted in front of the server and said, "Really? This is what you ordered?" I turned to the server and said, "We do not need anything comped." I pulled out my wallet, handed her my card and said, "This is for the bill. We'll be fine with what we have here. I'm very sorry for their behavior. You are doing a great job." Then I added a line that stung them deeply and that they still bring up years later. I was taught to treat people nicely, a lesson that seems to have been forgotten. "Thank you." They turned red. The server walked away. I looked down and cut my steak, saying nothing. The meal was virtually silent except for me asking my stepfather how his steak was a few minutes later. I signed the check, left a large tip, and we said our goodbyes. They have been nicer to servers each time we have gone out since. Story 32. I was not there for this, thank God. But my mother once sent a lengthy complaint email to a hotel restaurant because their smothered chicken was not smothered enough. One email even included the dictionary definition of smothered. Story 33. My mother needed to return some shirts at the mall because they did not fit. It was past the return period, so the employee said there was nothing she could do. My mother began screaming at a girl who was probably 16 or 17, calling her names and demanding to speak to the manager. When the manager explained they could not help and that the return policy was on the receipt, my mother threw a fit, knocked over a display next to the register, and stormed out of the store. I was about 6 or 7 at the time and was mortified. I apologized for her behavior and picked up what I could before she called for me to follow. The manager was very kind and told me I was a good kid and to stand up to my mother when I could. Story 34. Most of my memories of my mother involve her yelling at customer service employees, either on the phone or in person. I always felt bad for the employees. Once I was embarrassed after taking an online program for new drivers. It covered driving safety and took a long time. At the end, I had to call a customer service representative to confirm personal information and answer questions from the course to receive a discounted rate. My mother insisted I put the phone on speaker. Every time I did, the representative asked me to take it off speaker. My mother followed me around the house trying to listen in, and the representative heard her and asked her to stop. My mother became angry at the representative, and I did not get the lower insurance rate because the representative was fed up. Story 35. I was out to breakfast with my mom when our waitress suddenly disappeared. We sat for 30 minutes after ordering only eggs. It was an off time, so the diner was quiet, and it seemed the waitress had vanished. My mom asked someone if we could speak with the manager. The manager stopped by. My mom told her what had happened and asked her to check on our waitress and our food. 10 minutes later, the manager returned with our food and the waitress in tow. She put our food down, then proceeded to berate the waitress. The woman broke down in tears, apologizing profusely. We felt awful and did not finish our food. Once the manager was out of sight, my mom found the waitress, hugged her, and gave her a larger tip than usual. It was rough and left us both embarrassed. Story 36. This is my favorite example of my mom being an absolute wacko. We are from New York and I met her in Los Angeles where she was vacationing for a few days. There is a restaurant we had been to before and really wanted to visit again. I guess you could say it was a hot spot. It was lunchtime and we did not have a reservation. We arrived at the restaurant and there were a bunch of open tables. It was early, probably before noon. My mom asked for a table and they said they were sorry, but if we did not have a reservation, they unfortunately did not have any tables. They offered to take our phone number to call if there were cancellations. My mom started huffing and puffing, pointing at the tables that were reserved for noon and 12:30 but were currently empty. She made a scene and stormed out of the restaurant. I tried to explain how restaurants work, that there are empty tables because other people would be coming in later with reservations. She stormed down the block ranting that she had worked in restaurants her whole life and this was what they did. She said it was Los Angeles like a nightclub and that they did not like the way we looked. While she was ranting, the hostess came running down the block. There had been a cancellation and they could seat us immediately. I was humiliated and did not even want to eat there anymore. Long story short, I never take my mom to any restaurant I like. Story 37. We were going to a theme park in the capital of the country. I was about 19, one sister was 16, and the youngest was about 9. My dad had planned the trip for a year and we were excited. At the entrance there was a large lake with shops on each side, including a restaurant, a souvenir shop, and a Build-A-Bear workshop. The shop is not part of the park but has an entrance from it. My dad did not have custody of my youngest and saw her only sporadically by his own choice because his anxiety meant he could not care for her properly. She lived with a foster family. This was one of maybe 3 times a year he got to take her somewhere, so the trip was a big deal. He told her she could have one thing from the park and he would pay for it. As a 9-year-old, she chose a Build-A-Bear. My dad did not know the Build-A-Bear pricing. The base price is not the total cost because clothes, shoes, and accessories are extra. The store employee took my sister through stuffing the bear, putting the heart in, and then rang up the total. My dad lost it, red-faced and screaming at the young employee. I felt so embarrassed. The employee did not set the prices. This was the trip of the year. The 4 of us were together for the first time in a long while, and you do not yell at people like that. I understood why he was angry. He felt cheated and trapped because he had promised my sister anything. But you do not behave that way. The rest of the trip went without incident. My youngest does not remember it. She now has 2 Build-A-Bears and named each after one of her sisters. Story 38. My mom has been this person throughout my life, but I have one positive story. She and I went to eat at Portillo's when I was a teenager and we sat in the back of the restaurant where it was more private so we could eat in peace. About 10 minutes into our meal, 2 people came into the empty area and sat 2 tables away from us. It turned out to be a manager and an employee who was getting written up. The manager was being a complete jerk toward the employee, criticizing and belittling them. My mom put down her food, walked over, and started yelling at the manager for being so rude. She went on a rant about how wrong it was to do this in public and really let him have it. She demanded the phone number of the manager's supervisor, and we left after she received. I was embarrassed at the time, but as I got older I realized she was standing up for that employee and that the manager was in the wrong. I'm not sure what she did with that phone number because I lived with my dad and had to go home after the meal. Story 39. This was not my parents, but I was once out to dinner with my brother-in-law and his family. Our meals arrived at almost random times instead of all together. My brother-in-law demanded to speak to the manager because it was unacceptable that the food arrived at different times, and he said he hoped they would not expect us to pay for the meal. He gave a long speech about how we came out so we could eat together and that he knew this was unacceptable because he used to be a waiter and so on. I was mortified because I did not think it was a big deal. Story 40. My mom often does this, but one incident stands out. At a local Mexican restaurant, while we were paying, she tried to use a coupon. The cashier said they would not accept it, and my mom became furious. She demanded that the manager come out and accept the coupon and caused a scene that lasted at least 5 minutes. While the cashier went to get the manager, I looked at the coupon and realized it was for a different Mexican restaurant and my mom was not wearing her glasses. The cashier and manager returned, my mom apologized, and they accepted the coupon. Story 41. This is a strange story that had a huge impact on me. It is about a parent confronting a manager, but it is a little different. Growing up, my dad was sheriff of a small town. I must have been around 8 or 9. He was brought in after the previous sheriff was booted out for political reasons and stealing city funds. That was a really unpopular move, since the previous sheriff had been very popular, spread his money all over town, and let people get away with murder. The previous sheriff was out, and my dad was brought in. Everybody hated him, in part because they loved the old sheriff and also because my dad was an outsider, even though he came from about 2 towns over. He was not of their world, so they felt he could never be fit to lead the town. It did not help that my dad was strict about the rules. One day my dad was dressed in his full uniform and took me alone to the local corner diner, the kind of place straight out of the movie Roadhouse. We sat down and ate the full dinner, and my dad lectured me about respect and that the rules are all we have. Then the waitress brought the check. My dad looked at it and it said the meal was free. He excused himself and went up to the waitress. I kept to myself and doodled on the napkin. The next time I looked up, my dad was screaming at the woman and was shaking. She tried to explain that free meals are how all police officers are treated in this town, and my dad was furious that he would get special treatment, that police would be put above the normal laws. He said that police have rules they must follow, and not accepting kickbacks is one of those rules. He was especially upset that it happened in front of his child, whom he was trying to raise correctly. Everyone in the diner was quiet and staring at him. It was a strange situation because it was a moment where my dad showed a lot of integrity, but it was also the image of a 6'7" man with a gun on his belt screaming at a tiny waitress. It stuck in my head as a clear picture of the contradictions in our parents. Much of the good comes from them, but at the same time much of the bad does as well. Update. This blew up more than I expected, so I would like to promote not being an abusive police officer who harms your children. Update. Stop sending messages telling me how terrible my dad was. He is not a hero and did some really bad things in his life, but I am still his son and it is not pleasant to read strangers telling me how my dad was. You did not know him, you do not know his full story, you only know a slice of life told by one person. The point of this story is that people are complicated and full of contradictions. It is not an excuse for you to feel good about yourself on the internet. He beat me and my brother, had anger issues and was painfully insecure and closed off, but he was also a noteworthy police officer. He rose through the ranks and, as a white man, brought progressive racial policies to his department in the 1980s that to this day are still radical. He was an innovator as a police administrator. I will put it like this, he did heartbreaking things to me, and yet I found room to forgive him. Through a long and painful process, I found room to forgive him as an adult. I do not excuse his behavior, but I have put peace in my heart toward my feelings about him. Whatever opinion you have of him, keep in mind that from your computer it is easy to form an opinion, and for me it has been and will always be a really difficult one. Story 42. My mom once called Domino's regional corporate office about a pizza I ordered for her, which I paid for, because she said it was too expensive. She received for free pizza vouchers, but I am glad I was not there for the embarrassment. I ordered it online from my workplace in the next state because she wanted pizza. Story 43. My father would sometimes do this at restaurants when the server was too slow or the food was wrong, particularly when it happened multiple times in a single meal. He was justified in being frustrated, though the rest of us hated it. The worst time was at our favorite restaurant. My mother said, "I am not doing this." She gathered the three of us and we went to the car. To be clear, my father was not rude to anyone. He did this at most a few times a year. When he spoke with a manager, he was not insulting. The rest of us simply did not care enough about bad service to complain. Story 44. We traveled a lot when we were younger and used to skip lines at the airport. By the time we were in our early teens, my mother pretended to have a heart condition to avoid the long line to board the airplane. The flight attendant would have none of it and told us to go to the end of the line. I still remember everyone's expressions. Story 45. About the only thing my dad and I have in common is that we like to go thrifting, garage sales, estate sales, antique stores, and charity thrift shops. We do it for different reasons. I do it for the fun of finding something unusual and offbeat. My dad does it because he likes to find bargains and be one-up on the suckers who did not know what they had. I was mortified when my dad went to the charity shop checkout and complained for 10 minutes about being overcharged 50 cents. I left him in the store alone. When he finally came out, I dropped $5 in the donation jar and apologized for my asshole father. Story 46. Not long ago, my mom offered to treat my wife and me to lunch at Outback Steakhouse. We arrived and ordered. My mom ordered iced tea with extra lemon. The tea arrived with 1 lemon. Usually no big deal, just ask for more. Instead, my mom turned to the waiter and said, "What? No extra lemon? You fail as a waiter. No brownie points for you." The waiter hesitated, then said flatly, "I'll be right back with more lemon." I told my mom, "That's how you get your food spit on. You just signaled that this will be a poor tipping table and he's going to focus elsewhere." She argued, "Well, it should have inspired him to work harder to impress us." I said his odds of making money were now higher at another table. She went to the bathroom and cried. When she returned, she placed a very complicated order. I texted my wife, who was sitting next to me, "This waiter is going to butcher that order on purpose." The food arrived. Our orders were correct and perfect. Her meal was completely wrong. She asked for it to be fixed, more subdued this time. It returned technically correct but obviously carelessly prepared. I chuckled inside. After all that, she turned to us and said, "I was right about that waiter. He sucks at his job." Now, her behavior caused him not to care about serving her well. After being a total jerk and paying the price, she walked away feeling validated. I left a generous tip with a note that said, "Sorry for my mom." Story 47. It was at a Thank God It's Fridays restaurant in Katy, Texas. The waiter was amazing. He was working 8 tables that I could count and managed all of them flawlessly. Drinks never fell below 1/3 full at any table. He was always attentive, prompt, and friendly. A textbook example of the perfect waiter. He impressed my dad so much that my dad asked to speak to a manager. The waiter immediately asked if anything was wrong. Since people usually only ask for a manager when there is a problem, my dad said no. He wanted management to know about the excellent service. The waiter thanked us and said he would get a manager as quickly as he could. We waited about 10 minutes before a middle-aged manager sauntered over and began asking my dad how the waiter had screwed up. My dad is not the most patient person, and we were in a hurry to get home, so the wait rubbed him the wrong way. When the manager immediately acted like the waiter had made a mistake, my dad lost his temper. He told the manager the waiter had done everything perfectly and had received a $15 tip on a $35 bill. He also said the manager needed to be more respectful of the staff and scolded him for presuming the employee had screwed up. Before that moment, I thought my sister and I were the only ones he would scream at when he was upset. It was somewhat embarrassing to see my dad yell at the manager, but he did it for a good reason. Story 48. My mother came to my school because she thought I was lying about my scholastic assessment test scores. She did not think I was that smart. No one at my school would give her that information because they were not required to. She went to the principal and, in front of me, said, "I want to speak to your manager." He refused and they argued for a while. The principal knew I was a decent person and that the score I had told my mother about was legitimate. It was really embarrassing. Story 49. I cannot help but feel that I prompted you to ask this question. I am sorry for embarrassing you. Story 50. When I was about 6, my whole family, all 6 of us, went to the dollar store. I do not remember much, but I remember that when we were in the car about to go home, my mother was looking at the receipt and noticed that the cashier had given us $1 less in change than they were supposed to. My mother was furious and made us all go back inside. She started yelling at the teenage cashier, saying they were bad people and that this was wrong. The cashier said something like, "Okay, geez," and rolled her eyes while returning the correct change. This made my mother flip. She started screaming at the top of her lungs that they were evil and that the cashier needed to fix her attitude. Another time we had a fire in our house. Ash and fire extinguisher residue got all over the house, so we hired a cleaning company. 2 men and 2 women came. I do not know what exactly triggered my mother, but she apparently did not like the way they were cleaning. She began yelling at them and lecturing them that they should know how to clean, especially the women because they were female. She then showed them how to do it while continuing to yell. Many of her outbursts were the same toward us when she got mad. She has become a lot calmer since then, though. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.